Pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations.
One of the most important resources for all of us are our young people, our children and our youth. And one of the important resources for them as they grow and learn in our schools is a textbook. Today on Austin Faith Dialogue, we'll be talking with two men who have been and who are involved in the process of textbook selection for our children and our young people. Glad you joined us today on Austin Faith Dialogue.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sandy Wilder, today's host, and today we have two people to talk with. Our first is Jay Perry, who was for 11 years the Director of Textbook Selection at the Texas Education Agency. Our other guest is Bill Costas, who's Chair of the Math Department, right? At St. Andrews Middle School. It's an Episcopal school. Let's start with you, Jay, and help set the stage for us. Describe to us, if you will, what your job responsibilities involved while you were at TEA and how the whole process of textbook selection for our public schools came about.
Okay. Well, the director of the textbook division at that time was responsible for assisting the commissioner and the board in developing the necessary things to put together to adopt textbooks. The process is really quite interesting because Texas is the only state in the union, as far as I know at this point anyway, that has permanent funding for textbooks. And because of that, the Texas Education Agency buys all the books for the schools of the state. Thus, Texas has quite a following, you know, across the country, in that we adopt textbooks and purchase them from one single agency. And other states also have adoptions, some do, but they don't buy in one group from one source like we do, so consequently, we're probably the largest single purchaser of textbooks in the United States.
Do you have any idea for how long the state of Texas has been buying textbooks for all public school students in the state?
Since back in the 1920s.
Okay.
When it began.
Okay, so for about 70 years, we as a state have bought textbooks for all of our public school students.
Right.
I would guess that the process is somewhat different in a private school, right, Bill, where you're not operating under the same set of guidelines.
Yes, we're not required to use books that are adopted by the state of Texas. However, generally we do, but we don't have that cap on our selection process. We're able to select from whatever is available. In light of the fact that many of our students go on into the public school arena, we generally align ourselves with the public school, and therefore we use mostly the same books that the public school does use.
The difference being, though, that you're not required to do that?
Not required to, and we also get the benefit of when the state of Texas adopts, that book goes throughout the state that year. We're allowed the luxury of waiting a year and seeing how the book is received, seeing what the results of the book are, and so we've got a little advantage there, and we can pick and choose from what the state of Texas is using.
In the state process, how long does all this take? I would guess that you can't decide to order a book one month and the next month have it in hand. What kind of steps did you have to go through?
Well, it takes several years. Years back, there was one committee appointed made up of 15 people representing the various subject areas that were to be adopted. And the staff at TEA would develop what was called a proclamation calling for textbooks. And a committee would be appointed then when the publishers had submitted those books to review those books and recommend to the Commissioner and the State Board of Education the books that they felt best. Several years back, probably 8 years ago, they changed that in that they now have a committee representing each subject area. So there are 15 people in math, as an example, or 15 people in reading, or whatever the subject areas might be. And there's also a committee of 15 people made up of groups of people in those subject areas that write the proclamation or develop it for the board. Then another group is appointed to select those books and recommend them to the board. I believe now that they issue those proclamations approximately 2 years ahead of the time that the books are to be adopted. That gives the publishers time to develop the books according to what Texas wants. And then when they're submitted, then they can adopt up to 15 books per subject area.
15? Then what is the process? Because when I was in school, I know I didn't have 15 textbooks, say, for science. What's the process then to whittle down that number?
Well, prior to this change, they only adopted 5 books. Now they may adopt up to 15, but very seldom will you find that many books submitted anyway.
Oh, okay.
There are just not that many publishers anymore to write 15 different books in most subject areas. So I don't know what the numbers are now that they're receiving in the way of bids, but they can adopt up to 15. Another thing that was brought in at that time was that what they call waivers. Schools, if they don't want to use those books, can ask the commissioner to give them a waiver and use something else. So.
And then an individual school district selects its particular book or books from the list of those approved?
There's a committee appointed by the local board to review the books that the state has adopted. And then they choose from those books the books that they would use in their district. And then a district may choose not to, then they ask the commissioner for a waiver.
How often are waivers approved?
Every year there's some. I don't know how many it would, it would vary by year and subject matter.
Okay. What about in the private school arena? The process, I assume, also takes some time, even though you say you wait about a year to see how well a particular book does in the public schools.
If a department or if a teacher or a couple of teachers want to use a particular text, about all they have to do is to convince our director that this is the book that would work best for their particular subject or their particular needs. It meets their needs and will prepare the students for the next year. So our bureaucracy is not really very large.
Well, in math, let's say, which is your field,
yes.
How would you go about convincing your school's director? What do you have to show your director?
Primarily, what I would need to do would be to justify adopting a particular text, would be to demonstrate to her or convince her that this book does prepare the student for the follow-on courses that they might take, and that it meets our needs, whatever they may be at the time.
So you might show her, let's say, results of how well other students have done using this particular textbook?
Definitely. We would, I would have talked to some people who have used the book and get their comments and their opinions, and that a book that's been tried and found to be successful is a pretty good thing, as opposed to one that you don't know if it's going to work or not. You may not be satisfied with the sequencing in the book or something of that nature. And if somebody's already used it, they've already found the pitfalls for you. So you don't have to learn through the school of hard knocks. You can take advantage of their experience.
Okay. Now, often citizens like to have input in a particular process that involves their children. What kinds of ways does anybody have to say, well, we would like you to take a look at this particular textbook, or can we look at so-and-so? We might have some questions. How does that happen, let's say, in the arena of public schools?
Texas was the pioneer in that area. Many, many years ago, a few citizens told the commissioner that they had an objection to a certain textbook, so he invited them in to have a little meeting with him and tell him about it. From that evolved the process of any resident of Texas may speak for or against any textbook that's being considered for adoption. There are certain rules and regulations that have to be followed, and they can go through the Texas Education Agency and make a request to appear before the commissioner and the committee, and then ultimately the board, to speak, as I said, for or against. And through the years, it has proven quite helpful to the state to find some things maybe that somebody might overlook that would be good or bad about a book. And so other states now are doing a lot of that too. They followed Texas in that pattern.
So that kind of public appearance then obviously gives any of the people of faith here in the Austin area an opportunity to speak out of their faith background to the arena of education.
That's correct.
Okay. In a private school where you might have, say, more direct contact with parents or others interested in young people, yes. How is your process, similar or different?
Oh, in light of the fact that our director is readily available to parents, parents go directly to her with any concerns or any thoughts. And then, if necessary, we meet as a group, the director, the concerned parents, and the teachers that are teaching from that particular text, and we can discuss whatever the issue is and resolve what our differences might be.
Do you find, since you're a religiously based private school, that you have more rather than fewer parents speaking out of their faith background?
I don't necessarily think that would be true. We are an Episcopal school, but we don't necessarily push the Episcopal doctrine. We have a Christian doctrine that's acceptable pretty much to all faiths. And we've not had a lot of difficulty with this particular problem. But like I say, if it comes up, it's fairly easy to resolve when you just have a few people to get together and come to some sort of an agreement or compromise.
Being a smaller institution, more opportunities for dialogue then.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Exactly.
There will be I'm sure a lot more to talk about with our two guests this morning. When we come back from a break, we want to tell you a little bit about Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us as we continue our discussion about textbooks.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
Thanks for staying with us. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where we're talking today about the whole process of textbook selection in our schools and how that affects our young people. Let me ask you, Jay, in your experience with public education and knowing that our state is becoming more diverse, what do you see as some of the issues now when that diversity runs up against an agency that has responsibility for trying to meet everybody's needs? How does that play itself out in textbook selection?
Well, I think one of the things that brought on the broader numbers of textbooks was the fact that there were many interests and desires in books, and so going from a narrow list of 5 to a broader list of 15 should provide most of the needs or requirements or desires of people throughout the state. So there ought to be a broad enough area for them to find something that would satisfy their needs, I think, in a textbook that way.
That, and I suppose the whole process of waivers then gives a school district a wide variety to choose from, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's one way a state agency can try to meet increasingly diverse needs. In a private school, the process is probably somewhat different, because I would imagine that not all of your students are Episcopal, so you still deal with diversity, but how does that play itself out in a smaller arena?
Well, if we talk just purely from a subject matter point of view and a particular textbook, the point's well taken about the diversity that's now available and the diversity of the population of Texas. We see from one end of the spectrum to the other as far as math books are concerned. We see there's skill and drill books out there, and there's also books that rely quite heavily on computer activities or manipulatives or things of this nature, and all in between. So the school gets to kind of figure where they are in the spectrum and home in at that particular point. And of course, philosophically, there's a lot of differences in the different approaches.
Okay. Diversity can also play a role in terms of who's directing the process, I know, because if the two of you, say, didn't have a faith background, you might approach this whole question from a different direction than what you do. But I know that the two of you do have a faith background, and am wondering how, if at all, your notion of what's right and what's wrong, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, how that might have influenced your participation in the whole textbook selection process. I'll let you go first this time, Bill.
That's a little difficult when we think of my particular field. We are a Christian church, and our students have chapel every day. Our director teaches a theology class to all 7th graders. I think we're very student oriented, and I'm not sure how to verbalize the connection between our textbooks and our concern for our students. I think it would be more perhaps in the curriculum than in the textbook, because a textbook is something you use, but how it's used is driven by the particular teacher or by the curriculum that you're using.
And perhaps if you were in a different department and not in the math department,
exactly,
the point might be more easily explored.
Probably.
Okay. And you, Jay, had responsibility for directing a program, and perhaps your background influenced the way you approached the whole issue.
Well, of course, from the state level, you've got the separation of church and state, so, you know, you can never get into that end of it. You try to be fair to all people concerned and appreciate people's opinions, pro and con, and that we tried to do. the hearings that were held, you know, people got to express their beliefs and their opinions about particular things, but we could never get into it from the state level because of separation of church and state.
Okay.
But, you know, fairness, I think, is something that we've always tried to look after in our dealings with people. Another thing I think that's transpired in recent years is the expansion of what we used to call a textbook. Way back, it was only a printed piece of material that was bound in a hard cover. And now the books that are being adopted are multi approaches to teaching. You know, some of them have laser discs, and some have tapes, and some used to have film strips when they first came out, manipulatives for the elementary grades. I remember back, it's been many years ago now, that Texas adopted the first systems, that they called them systems, learning systems. And this was for kindergarten and first grade levels, where they would have manipulatives to work with. Then in, about, say, 8 years ago, they adopted an elementary science program that included laser discs as a part of it. So this has broadened out now to where there are just all sorts of things. Of course, it gets more costly that way, too.
I'm sure it would. But it's good for us to remember, then, that as technology has changed, so has the whole notion, I guess, of a curriculum resource. A textbook isn't necessarily a book anymore, right?
As a matter of fact, here recently in Austin, I believe that they may be going on a pilot program or something where, I believe it's science, where they're not going to have a textbook. And I think that's going to be kind of difficult for some people to accept, because we always think of school and having that book. But the point that was made by the teachers and the principal when they were presenting this to AISD was that that was not what they wanted, and that was not the best way to teach what it was they were trying to teach. So textbooks, maybe we're going to be out of business with text. I don't know, but I don't think so.
I think there'll always be books. But I think they have to be supplemented now with some of the later developments.
You're right. There will always still be a need for the printed page, I'm sure. Well, in an ideal world, if you had all the time, all the resources possible, all the information that you needed to make a decision, in that kind of ideal world, how would you, as two individuals involved in the process, design the whole process of textbook selection for your particular schools?
I think from my point of view, you've got to meet the needs of the student. If a particular student is ready for an advanced textbook, then that's what you want that student to be working from. If you've got a student that's not quite ready for an advanced textbook, then you don't want to drown him. You want to challenge him but not drown him. And so you might, it might require more than one particular text to meet the needs. Because not all the kids are the same. They're not all on the same level. They're not all gifted in the same areas. So it's just a matter of being able to meet the individual child's needs.
So a variety of resources, and perhaps some flexibility then in the selection process.
Exactly, and also in the way you're going to present it.
And in the teaching approaches, exactly. Yeah. Because a textbook, any resource just sitting there will just sit there until a person comes along to help the student work with that. And in the public arena, how might you design?
Texas has tried to provide flexibility. When a textbook's adopted, the school is entitled to order 110% of enrollment. Now, if you've got 100 kids, you can order 110 copies of that book. In so doing, you have enough extra books to allow for 2 or 3 things. Number one, a child moves in today, you've got a book for them. Number two, going back to the different levels of learning, you can utilize, say if you're teaching 4th grade, you've got some extra 3rd grade books, and some youngsters have not progressed as rapidly as you'd like. you can utilize some of those third grade books to help bring them up to where they need to be. Also, they've developed textbooks in bilingual education and other areas whereby they get both English and Spanish. So you've got a number of books there to meet the needs of the children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Texas has an ideal situation, and it's pretty difficult to beat it. They're making changes, and I think they're talking right now about making some more changes in the process. What they'll do, I don't know. But I think you've got to provide for flexibility for children, however you design a process.
Okay. I appreciate your letting us know that the process may be changing so that those persons who, say, are watching today might have an opportunity to participate in the process if they wanted to have their voices heard. What's the growing edge in textbook selection these days? Is it new technology? Is it resources in a number of different languages? Where do you see curriculum resources going?
I think technology is the thing that's right now has come to the forefront, and having some flexible approaches to teaching.
Okay.
Without a doubt, technology is there. You know, like you were talking about the laser disc. There's so many new things.
Okay.
But they're expensive.
They really are.
And that's always a consideration, whether you're a private school or a public school. When you start buying technology, you're always concerned about how long am I going to be able to use this technology. Mm-hmm. We figure the life of a book at so many years, a textbook. We're going to have to do the same thing with technology. How long will this be a viable thing in our classroom?
That's a good word, perhaps, for parents to take into account that the resource their student uses may be out of date sooner rather than later. Maybe you have, as we close our show today, a brief word for parents concerned about what their children are learning, how they might make their voice heard in textbook selection.
Well, they could begin by visiting the school and see, you know, if there are problems where they are and what the problems are. They can certainly get in touch with the Texas Education Agency and find out exactly what the process is and how they go about speaking to the various groups about their feelings about things. And that's, as I said, we were the first ones to do that in the United States, and it's still there.
Parents are listening this morning. Any last word then from you, Bill?
In any private school, I think the parents have a direct input to the teachers, to the directors, and they are heard because they are the customer.
I know they're hearing you today. Thank you, the two of you, for being here this morning, and thank you for tuning in. Listen to what these men have to say and let your voice be heard in the textbook selection process. We thank you for joining us with Austin Faith Dialogue today. Do tune in again next week.
Call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.